So, who's a Hindu? You might think that's a simple question, right? Something about culture, maybe religion. But in India, it's way more than that. It's actually a legal question. And the answer has huge real world consequences for things like who you can marry, what you can inherit, your family rights. So let's get into it. We're going to unpack exactly how modern Indian law tackles this big question. You've probably heard this idea before. A Hindu is born and not made. For centuries, this has been the common wisdom, right? It's this really deeply ingrained idea that it's all about birth, that it's a closed club, something you inherit. A very powerful statement. But, and this is the big question for us today, when you step inside a modern Indian courtroom, is that still true? Does that ancient belief actually hold any water legally? Has the law moved on? Well, let's find out. Okay, so to really get a grip on the legal side of things, we got to go back to the very beginning, to the word Hindu itself. And you know what? Its origin is probably not what you're thinking. It actually had nothing to do with religion to start with. Yeah, believe it or not, the word Hindu comes from Sindhu, which is the name for the Indus River. It was originally a geographical term. See, the Persians, when they were trying to say Sindhu, it came out as Hindu. So they were just talking about the people who lived near the river. It was a label for a location, not a belief system. And hey, the name India itself comes from that same root. Pretty cool, huh? So, how in the world did we get from a word meaning person who lives by the river to this really specific legal definition? Well, that's where we're going next. We're jumping into the actual legal texts, the codified laws that handle all those personal matters in India today, to see exactly how they spell out who counts as a Hindu. And this is where it gets really interesting, because the legal definition is incredibly broad. I mean, it's huge. The Hindu Succession Act of 1956 breaks it down into three big buckets. First, you've got anyone who is a Hindu by religion. That includes all the different sects and reform movements. Makes sense. Second, and this is key, the law specifically loops in Buddhists, Jains, and Sikhs for these purposes. And then there's the third category, which is basically a giant catch-all. It says the law applies to anyone who isn't a Muslim, Christian, Parsi, or Jew, unless they can prove otherwise. So think about that. It's a definition built on who's in, but just as importantly, on who's out. Okay, so with a definition that wide, you're probably wondering, what about conversion? What about people who change their faith? Can you get in? Can you get out? Is this a fixed legal status? Well, the law is actually super clear about this. And here it is, the big reveal. That old saying, a Hindu is born, is flat out busted by modern law. The legal reality today is clear. A Hindu can absolutely be made. The law makes room for choice. And you know, this isn't some brand new thing. The courts actually settled this question way back in 1928. In this really important case, the judgment was crystal clear. Conversion to Hinduism is valid and recognized, so for all legal purposes, if you convert, you're a Hindu. The key takeaway? The doors are, legally speaking, wide open. The law even has an answer for people who come back. Let's say someone converts from Hinduism to another religion, but then later decides to return. As soon as they reconvert, boom, they're back under the umbrella of Hindu law. It's a system that recognizes that a person's identity isn't always a one-way street. So, if the law casts such a wide net, who is specifically not included? Well, the legal acts are very direct. They spell out that these laws do not apply to Muslims, Christians, Parsis, or Jews. These communities have their own separate personal laws that govern them. That seems pretty straightforward, right? But hold on, there's one more really important exception, and it's one that a lot of people don't know about. And here it is, scheduled tribes. Under the Constitution, members of scheduled tribes are not automatically covered by the Hindu Succession Act. And this is a big deal. It's true even if a particular tribe follows a lot of Hindu customs or beliefs. They remain outside the scope of this specific law unless the central government officially says otherwise through a specific notification. All right, we've been swimming in some deep legal waters here. Definitions, exceptions, but why does any of this really matter? What's the big deal? Well, it matters because this legal label, who the law considers a Hindu, directly shapes the most personal, most fundamental parts of life for hundreds of millions of people. I mean, think about it. Your legal status as Hindu dictates the rules for marriage and divorce. It controls how property and inheritance work when someone passes away. It sets the laws for adopting a child, for guardianship, for maintenance, the whole shebang. This isn't just some abstract legal theory. This is the operating system for family life in the eyes of the law. And because the stakes are so high, changing that legal status has real, immediate consequences. Here's a perfect example. Under the Hindu Marriage Act, if you convert to another religion, your spouse can use that conversion as legal grounds to file for divorce. Just like that. It's a powerful reminder of how a personal decision about faith can completely change your legal rights and relationships. Now, this whole legal framework we've been talking about, it didn't just pop up out of nowhere. It was built piece by piece over a long time. It really started back in 1850 with an act that protected inheritance rights for people who converted. Then came the big moment right after independence in 1955 and 56 with this huge burst of legislation, the Marriage Act, the Succession Act, and others. These acts are the very foundation of modern Hindu personal law today. So where does that leave us? We've seen that in the eyes of the law, being a Hindu is way more complicated, way more inclusive, and much more fluid than that old idea of just being born into it. It's a definition that's been shaped by geography, by belief, and, just as much, by who it leaves out. And that brings us to one last thing to chew on. If a legal identity can be built like this, so broad and yet so specific, what does that really say about the blurry, constantly changing lines between culture, religion, and the law?